friends, Earl at logbook.com here for more Infinite Sheep on, I don't know if it's an auspicious or inauspicious occasion. This one is scheduled to drop on the 30th anniversary of the 1996 Fort Smith tornado, which happened on a Sunday night around 11:15. I remember all this so well because, boy, was I there. Was I ever. To kind of understand the brew of ingredients that went into this event, let's actually look at the original radar hard copies. You can see there the radar detected, there is it's a TVS, tornadic vortex signature, once it crossed the Arkansas River and was in Crawford County. Before then, it was just a really bad storm that had been tornado warned all the way up to the Arkansas border. And then, inexplicably, the Tulsa Weather Service decided, you know what? Fort Smith just gets a thunderstorm warning. They'll be fine. They thought it had weakened below the limits, although it's really hard looking at that radar view where you're seeing the precipitation and velocity, and you're seeing the collision there, the red and the green. It is hard to imagine anyone looking at that and saying, thunderstorm warn that baby, it'll be fine. Also, you'll notice that curve of the rain. It's not that the rain cut off there. This was at the extreme edge of the NEXRAD radar view out of Tulsa, because at the time we did not have our own radar over here. It had been decided that the Fort Smith area did not merit one. And so when you are that close to the edge, the very edge of the radar's effective resolution, the data becomes less reliable. And so again, they called it a thunderstorm warning. And then a tornado blew into town. This is looking across the Garrison Avenue Bridge into Oklahoma. I lived on the second story of a 100-year-old brick building at the corner of 4th and Garrison. The first floor, underneath my apartment, it was two different things. Half of my apartment was over a barber shop. The other half was over a bar called Old Town Grain and Feed, which was the former name of the whole building. Like I said, all very old brickwork, and not a great place to be in a tornado. The station, the TV station, was at the other end of the same block. It was at 5th and Garrison. And so I literally walked to and from work, which I remember when I moved thinking, this will make my life so much simpler. Not always, because once it became known that I was living at the other end of the block, it became much easier to call me in for the slightest little thing, and believe me, they did. The 200 and 300 blocks of Garrison got completely trashed. In the 300 block, you had a hamburger barn, which had its roof ripped off. That was the Eads Brothers building that was across the street from where I lived and one block over. Okay, there you can see my apartment, the 3rd through 4th windows from the left at that corner. That was where I lived, second story of that building. Half over the barber shop, half over the bar. Sound was interesting at night. Uprooted a tree right in front of my windows. Kind of amazed that building did not take worse damage. The Garrison building, the Ward Garrison building, that's the ground floor. That's where the station was. The station was on the second floor of this building, who had all of its windows blasted out. The electrical power was a mess for about at least a month after the tornado hit, because the substation you see in the background, that got completely trashed, and they kept doing these patchwork fixes to it until finally there was an event where they were like, okay, you know what? We have to take this offline for a day and fix it properly. Flooded the Riverfront Park area, of course, because that park always gets it. The moment it rains, it pretty much floods. And that's standing on the bridge, about halfway down the bridge, looking back into Fort Smith. The aftermath of this was a lot of work, seeing what buildings could be saved. Some buildings, especially on Garrison, couldn't be. Once it went north of Garrison, it hit the wastewater treatment plant. There's the KWHN radio tower, bent in half back toward the ground. Across the street from where I lived, literally across the street. The Broadway restaurant had this huge awning that ran from the front of the building almost out to Garrison. Gone. Except for that part that, was kissing the ground. A lot of very old brickwork, perhaps not maintained as well as it should have been. Adds up to a lot of flying projectiles. I mean, honestly, what is amazing is that things were not worse. Now, you remember I pointed out the Eads Brothers building that was across Garrison and one block over. It was closer to the station than it was to my apartment. When they turned the gas back on at that Eads Brothers building, it freaking exploded. There was a gigantic fire, and they started evacuating everything around it. Like, the station was told to evacuate. The apartments I lived in at the opposite end of the block were told to evacuate. I ran over there. I left work and ran over there to get my cats in their carriers. Only to find that I could only get one of them in a carrier. The other one ran and hid behind the fridge. And I had to leave him because I couldn't get him to come out. And there's sheriff's deputies at my door saying, "Get out now." This was a couple of days after the tornado. It was that was a hell of a week. I remember looking out one of those big front windows of my apartment just for a second and just kind of taking in the scale of the fire. And I remember putting my hand on the glass and it burned my hand. That's how hot it already was. They were hosing down our buildings on our side of Garrison because they were already concerned that this whole part of the city was just going to go up. They were wetting down the buildings. You're trying to keep them from catching fire because there wasn't a whole hell of a lot they could do about the building that was burning down itself. So it was, they were focusing water and, that effort on that building, but they were also doing preventive measures across the street. And this was about the time that, I was all but dragged out of there with one cat. My cat who stayed, when I got home, little white cat, he was white and gray because either he had just really crouched down behind every single dust bunny behind the fridge, or actual soot got in the building, which I don't completely rule out. Buildings were never exactly airtight, as old as they were. It was a trendy place to live. It was convenient for getting to and from work. Kind of wish I'd never gone there. So that was the tornado in 96. The funny thing is, I got a phone call right before it happened, a phone call from the station. Hey, we need to put a tornado warning on the air. Now, we hadn't had a weatherman in ages. And it was kind of we used to have a system where we would use the toaster, the video toaster, and a DVE to squeeze the picture down and have some information in the frame, rather than putting anything over the programming. It was, we squeeze the programming down, the information is on the side of the frame, which I do still think is a good idea. I'm not sure if we executed it correctly, but they called me in because they wanted me to put a tornado warning. What, they wanted me to get on camera? Yeah, that's how desperate it was. And the hail was already up to about baseball size while I was running tear-ass from one end of that block to the other. And I raced as fast as I could up those back fire escape stairs, got in the building. Almost as soon as I got in the building, we lost power. This was Fox 46. We barely had a TV station. We did not have backup generators. And I just ran down to the control room and, saw flashlights in there. And I was just like, go, 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 go. Downstairs, downstairs, downstairs. We're on the second floor. Tornado's coming. We've got big plate glass windows. No, we're not staying in the station. There was a below ground level where there were some public restrooms and vending machines in the first floor of what used to be the Ward Hotel. It was kind of the ballroom area, really. But it was all businesses at this time. But there was that downstairs below ground level. That's where we were headed. And, we kind of camped out there for a little bit. The power stayed off, but the noise died down. And the damage to the station was not inconsiderable. We had 2 satellite dishes on the top of the building. One of them stayed put, was pointed in a direction where it will not be receiving any satellites ever again. The other dish was gone. It's somewhere in Madison County. I think we were off the air for 24 to 48 hours, if I remember correctly, and we only got back on by using the live truck, parking the live truck behind the building, literally running cables out to it. Because the other thing that was ripped off the roof was our line of sight transmitter, our microwave, that sent the signal from our building to where the actual transmitter tower was over in Van Buren. We had to use the microwave, we had to use the line of sight microwave on the live truck parked behind our building to get back on the air. And so that meant that truck had to be kept running round the clock. Also means, you've got a live truck with the keys in it, sitting there running all the time. You cannot leave that thing unattended. So it was all hands on deck. We had water damage in the building because roofs and windows leaked, and just not good. There was blowback for the Tulsa office of the National Weather Service over this because no matter how charitable you're being about it, they screwed up. They screwed up. And if I remember correctly, like their chief meteorologist got reassigned. It was like, get this guy out of the blast radius for the good of his career. And that way we bring in someone else and make a big show of, oh, we're changing management. Well, no, you really just shuffle that guy off for PR purposes, and now he's, in Nebraska somewhere. The guy they brought in with was Lance Rothfuss, who earlier, 10, 15 years earlier, had been a noted a storm chaser. If you ever saw the Nova special on PBS about storm chasers, where they were deploying the Toto, which later inspired the movie Twister with the Dorothy thing, and basically it's an oil barrel with instrumentation in it. Lance Rothfuss was with that group. He was with the Toto group trying to deploy these instrumented oil barrels in the path of a tornado, which never actually quite worked out, but his research in that field was very well respected. He was actually a pretty good choice to head up the Tulsa Weather Service. But, to the point, if you ever see that Nova tornado episode, and I believe it's on archive.org and probably on YouTube as well, much younger Lance Rothfuss, long before he got thrust into our situation over there. What we did get out of it was a radar installed south of Fort Smith, which covered that dead spot, because as it was, we were right at the edge of Tulsa's radar. Well, we were even closer to the edge of Little Rock's radar, and Fort Smith was screwed. This situation was, you can't imagine a situation with more single points of failure happening all at once, but they did like a domino chain. The line from the sheriff's office to the tornado sirens got cut by the wind. It just crazy coincidences like that. So the sirens didn't go off. There was no tornado warning until after there was a tornado. It was not great PR for the Tulsa Weather Service. I'll put it that way, and not a good day at the office for them. One thing I do want to bring up, there is a famous story, locally famous, from this event, was that they did have storm spotters on the ground yelling at them on ham radio. There is a tornado. We've seen it. It's on the ground. It's heading into Fort Smith. And the Weather Service was asking for landmarks, place names. Where are you that you're seeing this? And the answer was something like near, we saw it on the ground near Spiro. Or near Poto is where it was. And the Tulsa Weather Service, whoever was manning their ham radio, was like, where is Poto? Poto's in your state, bro. It's in your coverage area. It's in your warning area. Do you not know where it is? The reason I bring this up is this may have been someone who was a new hire from out of town, in which case that's not necessarily his fault. But in the past year, we have had Tegna, which is a large station ownership group. We had Byron Allen's station group. Both of them announced, we are going to be reducing the number of meteorologists we hire at our stations But each region will have one meteorologist that covers that whole region of the country. No. Now, I believe Byron Allen Station Group backed down from this after a very public backlash. I really want to see the same happen to Tegna, because if you do things that way, when you have people from out of town with no ground level knowledge of local geography or topology, you're going to get people killed. And that really bothers old farts like me, people who are old enough that to start working in broadcast, we had to be FCC license holders. And, we had to take the exam for that and qualify for the license. And it was a sacred trust informing the public. This was your community. This is where you live. You're accountable to them. You do it right. That was really the value of locally owned broadcasting. As much as I want to say it was goofy, funky, weird production work like all the stuff I've shown you previously on this show, no, the real value of it was that the people who owned the station and managed the station and ran the station, the people who were on camera, the people like me who were pushing buttons, we all lived there. We were accountable to that community. We were there to serve that community. And it was a thing people used to take seriously. Now it's all owned and operated from out of town. And that duty of care no longer exists. Your life is not worth some station group's corporate bottom line. And it used to be that the FCC was stacked top to tail with people who were there to stop that sort of thing. Not so much these days. Anyway, sorry, this has turned into a right cranky old man rant, hasn't it? But these are things I think about. I've been asked many a time, more than once, in the comments for Infinite Sheep, what about the 96 tornado? Well, that's what I remember. I do remember that after the horses ran out of the barn, we installed a barn door. It was one thing we very quickly found out was that we were not in compliance with the emergency broadcast system requirements, or I'm trying to remember when it changed from EBS to EAS. And I don't actually remember off the top of my head. Either way, we were not in compliance, but I also don't think we were expected to be, because we were a low-power station. We had this chain of transmitters just to get our signal to reach where other stations, just had one or two transmitters. I don't think the low-power stations were expected to be in requirement with, within requirements as far as having a warning system like that. But with the insurance money that came in from the huge amount of damage that we took, some of it was spent well, some of it was spent stupidly. But one thing we did do is actually install an automated warning system, I believe was an early example of a Cody system. And we did this spot as if this was some huge innovation that no other station could offer. When in fact, if you listen very carefully to the wording, well, I'll explain it to you when I get back.
In Tornado Alley severe weather can occur at any time. In the Fort Smith-Fayetteville area, there's only one major television station transmitting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, bringing you the latest weather watches and warnings. Introducing Fox Alert, your only guaranteed source of accurate weather around the clock on television in the Fort Smith area. No matter what time of day or night, Fox Alert brings you timely, dependable updates on approaching severe weather. While there are other stations are off the air, Fox Alert is there. And last word, first warning weather only on KBBI TV.
I love how much reverb is on Bill's voice there, right there at the end. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Man, that's almost thank you very much level of reverb in effect. So, anyway, there's like a series of asterisks after all of these promises and guarantees that spot is making. We're the only station that is on 24/7. Well, I think, other stations shut down on like between Saturday night and Sunday morning for regular maintenance for a window of something like 3 to 4 hours. Okay, it's not unheard of for stuff to hit in that time, but boy, he's really trying to make it sound like, oh, we're the only ones who are doing this right. It's like, no, dude, we are closing the barn door after the departure of the horses. One other thing I do remember is that on the first anniversary of the tornado, that was obviously the topic of our morning show, and I did a series of commercial break bumpers. And I'm not playing the audio on these because you could see from the slate I was using like contemplative piano music. Okay, there you saw our one satellite dish that was completely bent. Let me actually go back and I will pause on some of this. Yeah, okay, that's one of the satellite dishes. It's history. The microwave dish, nowhere in sight. Yeah, that is a station that is off the air. And that is on the 13th floor of the Ward Garrison building, which is where those dishes were. Forced to vacate. You ain't kidding, Eads Brothers. That was one day before they turned the gas back on. At which point this happened. And let's see, what's the other one? K-Win Tower down again. Whole chunks of buildings just missing. And these were homes on the north side of Fort Smith, close to kind of ground zero. So that was 30 years ago. It's kind of amazing that it was 30 years ago. And it's also one of the reasons I'm putting all this stuff now in this very much larger than usual video. It's like 3 times longer than I usually try to run with these. Is because the awareness that it was 30 years ago is... that's kind of daunting, you know? The pool of people who were there and remember this is smaller now than it was. I mean, obviously. But when you get to the point where it's 30 years later, it's like, okay, that pool is much smaller than it was. And wow. So I thought it would help to kind of get these reminiscences on the record. I was there. I remember it well. Kind of wish I hadn't been there, but I was. And anytime someone talks about cutting down staffing at the National Weather Service, anytime someone talks about, oh, you know, we're just going to hand that responsibility over to a commercial vendor like AccuWeather. Anytime someone talks about, oh, we're going to hire fewer meteorologists for our stations and just have, you know, one guy in St. Louis do it for 2 and 3 states away. Push back on that. push back on that. The loss of local broadcasting, this is what we've lost. You've lost meteorologists who actually know where the hell they are and what the landmarks are. We've lost people who actually know what is in the city that they are covering. We've lost a lot more than my weird, funky little productions, I'll put it that way. I think we need to prioritize getting that back.